Grace Whitmore's knees hit the frozen ground. Her arms tightened around Tommy's small body as the blizzard swallowed them whole. 3 children. Not hers by blood, not hers by law, but she'd die before she let them freeze. "Mama, get up," Will's voice cracked through the wind. She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't move. Then hoofbeats. A dark figure emerging from white nothing. "All 4 of you? Get in." Those 5 words would shatter everything Grace thought she knew about survival, family, and love. Subscribe now, stay until the end, and comment your city below. Let me see how far this story travels. 10. The wagon wheel had cracked 2 miles back. Grace heard it, that sickening snap of wood giving way, and knew before she even climbed down to look. She knew the way a woman knows when fate has made its final decision about her life. "Stay inside," she told the children. Her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Don't move." "But Ma," Will started. "William, stay." The 12-year-old's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. He always obeyed when she used that voice. The voice she'd learned to summon in the 3 months since his father died. The voice that said, "I am holding this family together with nothing but will and prayer, and you will not make it harder." Grace dropped to her knees in the snow, examining the damage. The wheel hadn't just cracked. It had splintered clean through, pieces of it scattered across the frozen road like broken promises. Behind her, the horse stamped nervously. Old Belle, the only animal Jacob had left them. The only thing standing between them and the 20 miles of empty Texas prairie that separated them from town. 20 miles, in a blizzard, with 3 children and no wheel. Grace pressed her palm against her mouth, trapping the sob before it could escape. She couldn't cry, couldn't scream, couldn't do any of the things her body was begging her to do. The children were watching through the wagon's canvas cover. She could feel their eyes on her back. "Ma." Sarah's voice this time. 9 years old and too smart for anyone's comfort. "Ma, how bad is it?" Grace stood, brushed the snow from her skirt, turned to face them with a smile she'd practiced in mirrors back in Boston, back when she thought she'd need it for dinner parties and social calls instead of moments like this. "Just a small problem," she said. "Nothing we can't fix." Will's eyes told her he didn't believe a word. She climbed back into the wagon, pulling Tommy into her lap. 5 years old, still warm despite the cold seeping through every gap in the canvas. His small hands found her face, patting her cheeks like he was checking she was still real. "You're cold, Ma." "Just a little." "Papa said you shouldn't be cold. He said Boston ladies don't know how to handle Texas winters." The mention of Jacob sent something sharp through Grace's chest. Not grief exactly. Something more complicated. The man had been kind enough. Had sent for her when his first wife died, needing someone to raise his children. Had married her proper in the church with Reverend Grant presiding. But he'd never loved her. And she'd never expected him to. What she had expected was time. Time to learn this land. Time to learn these children. Time to figure out how to turn a house full of strangers into something resembling a family. 3 months. That's all she'd gotten. 3 months before the riding accident that everyone in town whispered wasn't an accident at all. "Ma," Will's voice pulled her back. "The snow's getting worse. We can't stay here." "I know. We have to walk." "William, I can carry Tommy part of the way. Sarah can keep up. We've got maybe 3 hours of daylight left, if we move fast." 20 miles in a blizzard? Grace shook her head. "We'd freeze before we made 5. "Then what?" The boy's voice cracked again. Childhood fighting with the man he was being forced to become. "What do we do?" "Just sit here and wait to die." Sarah made a small sound. Tommy's hands tightened on Grace's collar. "No one is dying." Grace said it firm, final, like saying it could make it true. "There's a homestead about 4 miles east, the Morrison place. I saw smoke from their chimney when we passed this morning." The Morrisons moved out last month, Will said flatly. Mr. Callahan bought their land. Callahan. The name hit Grace like a fist to the stomach. Marcus Callahan, owner of the biggest ranch in 3 counties. The man who'd been circling their little farm like a vulture since the day Jacob died. The man whose lawyers had sent 3 letters in the past month, each one more insistent than the last, demanding she sell. The man who, according to the whispers she'd heard in town, might have had something to do with her husband's death. There has to be somewhere else, Grace said. There isn't. Will's voice was hollow. Next closest place is the Callahan ranch house, about 6 miles north. 6 miles. In this weather. With Tommy's small legs and Sarah's thin coat and her own Boston-bred bones that still hadn't learned to stop shaking in temperatures that Texas natives called mild. Then we go north, Grace said. Ma, that's crazy. William Jacob Whitmore. She used his full name, the one his real mother had given him, the one she had no right to use, but used anyway because she'd learned it was the only thing that made him listen. We are not staying in this wagon to freeze. We are not giving up. Your father trusted me to take care of you, and I will do that even if I have to drag all 3 of you through this blizzard on my back. Do you understand me? Something shifted in Will's face. Not softening exactly, but something close. Yes, ma'am. Grace bundled them as best she could. Extra blankets wrapped around Tommy until he looked like a small, disgruntled cocoon. Sarah's hands tucked into her own muff, the one luxury Grace had brought from Boston that had somehow survived the journey. Will refused any extra covering, insisting the cold didn't bother him. Lying. He was always lying about things like that. They set out into the white nothing. The first mile wasn't bad. Grace kept Tommy on her hips, switching sides when her arms burned. Will walked ahead, breaking a path through the deepening snow. Sarah stayed close, her small hand occasionally finding Grace's elbow when the wind gusted hard enough to push them sideways. The second mile, Grace started to pray. Not the proper prayers she'd learned in Boston's finest church. Not the polite requests for blessings and guidance. These were raw, desperate things. Pleas torn from somewhere deeper than she'd known she possessed. Please, please. I'll do anything. Just don't let them die. The third mile she fell for the first time. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow. A rock, a root. It didn't matter, and suddenly she was down. Tommy tumbling from her arms, Sarah crying out. Will, running back with panic breaking through his careful composure. Mama, are you hurt? Grace pushed herself up. Her hands were numb. When had her hands gone numb? She couldn't feel her fingers. Couldn't feel the snow melting against her palms. Couldn't feel anything except the terrible certainty that she wasn't going to make it. I'm fine. Another lie. She was getting good at those. Just tripped. Keep moving. They kept moving. Somewhere in the 4th mile, Grace realized she couldn't feel her feet anymore. She didn't tell the children. Didn't let them see her stumble, catch herself. Keep going through sheer, stubborn refusal to stop. If she stopped, she'd never start again. If she stopped, these 3 children would be alone in a blizzard with no one coming to save them. No one was coming anyway. That was the thought that broke her. No one in town knew they'd left. No one would miss them until it was far too late. They were alone, completely and absolutely alone, in a land that killed people like her for sport. Grace fell again. This time she didn't get up. Ma. Sarah was crying now, pulling at Grace's arm with desperate strength. Ma, please, you have to get up. I'm trying. God, she was trying. But her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her whole body had become a foreign thing, heavy and cold, and refusing every command her mind screamed at it. I just need a minute. We don't have a minute. Will was on his knees beside her, his face white with fear he couldn't hide anymore. Ma, please, please, you can't leave us. You can't. Tommy's small voice cut through the wind. Someone's coming. Grace forced her head up, forced her eyes to focus through the swirling white. A dark shape, moving toward them, the sound of hoofbeats muffled by snow. Will scrambled in front of her, putting his body between the approaching figure and his family. 12 years old and ready to fight whatever was coming. Ready to die if that's what it took. Grace's heart cracked clean in half. The figure emerged from the blizzard like something from a dream. A man on a dark horse leading a second horse behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low against the wind and a coat that looked warm enough to stop a bullet. He pulled up short when he saw them. Took in the scene with eyes Grace couldn't quite make out in the dim light. A woman collapsed in the snow. 3 children huddled around her, all of them more than halfway to freezing. "What in God's name?" "Stay back!" Will's voice cracked, but he didn't move. "Stay away from us!" The man dismounted in one smooth motion. Moved toward them with purpose, ignoring Will's warning like it was nothing more than wind noise. "Boy, I ain't here to hurt you." His voice was deep calm, with the rough edges of someone who'd spent his life in this land. "But if y'all don't get out of this storm in the next few minutes, hurting's gonna be the least of your problems." "We don't need your help." Will again. Stubborn. Terrified. Doing his best. "Will." Grace's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Will, stop." The boy looked at her. Looked at his siblings. Looked at the man standing over them with something in his expression that might have been compassion or might have been calculation. "Please." Grace didn't care anymore. Didn't care about pride or independence or the 100 reasons she had to distrust every man in Texas. "Please, the children." The man crouched down, bringing himself to her level. This close, she could see his face weathered, strong-jawed, with a scar running down his left cheek, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Not handsome exactly, but something. Something that made her breath catch despite the cold. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honest. Can you walk?" Grace tried to move her legs. Nothing happened. "No," she admitted. "I don't think I can." He nodded like this was exactly what he'd expected. Then, without warning, without asking permission, he scooped her up into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. "What?" Grace started. "Hush. Not cruel, just final." "Boy, can you ride?" Will's chin came up. "Course I can." "Good. Take my horse. Put your brother in front of you, your sister behind. You know the way to the Callahan ranch house?" "Yes, sir." Wary now, confused. "But." "No buts. You ride hard as you can, don't stop for nothing. There'll be men at the gate. Tell 'em Jesse Callahan sent you, and tell 'em to get the guest room ready and hot water boiling. Can you do that?" Jesse Callahan. Grace's stomach dropped. Callahan. Of course. Of course it would be a Callahan who found them. Of course the man holding her in his arms like she was something precious, instead of something in the way, would be connected to the family trying to destroy hers. "Ma." Will was looking at her, waiting for permission, asking without asking if he should trust this stranger. What choice did they have? "Go," Grace said. "Take your brother and sister and go." "But what about you?" "I'll be right behind you." Jesse Callahan's voice was firm. "Got a pack horse here. She'll carry double well enough. Your ma and I will be no more than 10 minutes behind. Now go, boy, before this storm gets worse." Will hesitated one more moment. Then he grabbed Tommy, swung up into the saddle with a grace that surprised Grace. She hadn't known he could ride like that, and pulled Sarah up behind him. 10 minutes, he said, looking at Jesse with eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. "If you're not there in 10 minutes, I'm coming back." "Fair enough." Jesse stepped back, letting Will kick the horse into motion. "Now ride." They disappeared into the white. Grace found herself alone with a stranger. A Callahan, the son of the man who wanted to take everything from her. "Ma'am, I'm gonna put you on this horse now." Jesse's voice was gentler than she'd expected. "You're gonna want to fight me on it, but I'm asking you not to. I can see the frostbite starting on your fingers. We don't have time for arguments. Why are you helping us?" The question came out before she could stop it. Stupid question. Suspicious question. The kind of question that could make a man decide he didn't want to help after all. But Jesse just looked at her with those gray eyes, and something in his expression shifted. Because my mama taught me that leaving folks to die ain't something a decent man does, even when those folks might have reason to wish he would. He lifted her onto the horse before she could respond, mounted behind her, one arm wrapping around her waist to hold her steady. His body was warm against her back, solid, real in a way that made the nightmare of the past hour feel slightly less like drowning. "Hold on," he said. "This ain't gonna be comfortable, but it'll be fast." They rode. Grace drifted in and out of awareness. The cold had done something to her mind, made everything soft and strange and disconnected. She was vaguely aware of Jesse's arm keeping her upright, vaguely aware of his voice in her ear, talking to her, keeping her conscious when consciousness seemed like too much effort. "Stay with me now, ma'am." "Almost there." "You got 3 kids waiting on you. Can't disappoint them, can you?" "No, ma'am, you cannot." "There you go. There's the gates. We made it. We made it, you hear me?" Lights, voices, someone shouting orders, arms lifting her down, carrying her inside into warmth so sharp it felt like burning. "The children," Grace gasped. "They're here." Jesse's face swam into view. "They're safe. All 3 of them warming up by the fire. You did good, ma'am. You kept them alive." "Grace." The word scraped out of her throat. "My name is Grace." Something flickered in those gray eyes, something warm. "Grace," he repeated like he was tasting the word. "That's a pretty name." Then the warmth took her, and the world went soft, and Grace Whitmore, widow stranger woman, with no legal claim to 3 children, or the land she was fighting to keep, let herself sink into darkness. She dreamed of snow, of falling, of a voice saying, "All 4 of you get in," over and over, until the words stopped meaning anything at all. Grace woke to firelight and voices, low voices, arguing. "Can't just throw them out, Father. Look at them. The woman nearly died." "I'm aware of what nearly happened, Jesse. I'm also aware of who she is. Jacob Whitmore's widow, the woman who's been refusing to sell me that land for 3 months. That's got nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with it." "You think this is coincidence? Her wagon breaking down within riding distance of our ranch. Her collapsing in the snow right where you happen to be checking fences. This is a scheme. A manipulation. She's using those children to— To what? To trick me into saving her life. Listen to yourself." Grace kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing even. The women at the finishing school in Boston had taught her many things, but none so useful as this, the art of appearing unconscious while learning exactly what kind of men she was dealing with. "I'm listening to myself just fine." The other voice, Marcus Callahan, it had to be, was colder, harder. The voice of a man who'd built an empire by never giving an inch to anyone. "And what I hear is my son, my heir, getting soft over a pretty face and a sob story. She's a scheming Eastern woman who probably drove her husband to his grave and now wants to wring sympathy from— Don't." The single word cracked through the room like a whip. Grace heard footsteps, movement. When Jesse spoke again, his voice had dropped to something low and dangerous. "Don't you dare speak about her that way. You don't know her. You don't know anything about what she survived or what she's fighting for. All you see is land. That's all you've ever seen. Land and money and power and ways to get more of all 3. I see reality, boy, something you've never had the stomach for. No, you see opportunities. You see that woman's farm sitting on the only reliable water source between here and Miller's Creek, and you want it. You've wanted it for years. And when Jacob Whitmore died—" A pause. Heavy, dangerous. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything." But Jesse's voice had changed. Colder now, more careful. "I'm saying that woman and those children will stay here until they're recovered. I'm saying you will treat them as guests. And I'm saying if you so much as mention buying their land while they're under this roof, you and I are going to have a problem. You're threatening me in my own house? I'm telling you where my line is, something Mama taught me that you seem to have forgotten. Another pause. Grace could almost feel the tension crackling between them. Then Marcus Callahan laughed, short, bitter, without humor. Your mother. Yes. She taught you a great many things, didn't she, soft heart? Soft head, useless sentimentality. Everything that makes a man weak in this country. Mama wasn't weak. Your mother was a Mexican woman who had no business marrying into this family. I made that mistake once. Paid for it every day since. I won't watch you make the same mistake with some penniless widow who's probably not even really married to the sound of something breaking. Glass maybe, or wood. Grace's eyes flew open before she could stop herself. Jesse stood with his back to her, facing a man who had to be his father. Marcus Callahan was everything she'd imagined from the stories, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of cruel handsomeness that came from a lifetime of getting whatever he wanted. His eyes were the same gray as his son's, but colder. Calculating. A shattered glass lay at their feet. Whiskey pooled on the wooden floor. Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus noticed her first. His expression shifted instantly from rage to something smooth, polished, false. How fortunate that you're awake. I trust you're feeling better. Jesse spun around. His face was white with fury, but it softened when he saw her. Softened in a way that made something flutter in Grace's chest, despite everything. Ma'am Grace, you shouldn't be sitting up. The doctor said, the children. Grace's voice came out rough, unused. Where are the children? Safe. Jesse moved toward her, his boots crunching on broken glass. Kitchen with the cook. She's feeding them something hot. They're fine, all three of them. Grace closed her eyes. Let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since Boston. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Don't thank him yet. Marcus's voice cut through the moment. Your guest's here temporarily, Mrs. Whitmore. Very temporarily. As soon as this storm passes and your strength returns, my men will escort you back to your property. Where you will, I hope, reconsider my very generous offer. Father. No, let him speak. Grace opened her eyes, met Marcus Callahan's cold gaze with everything she had left. Your generous offer, Mr. Callahan. The one where you pay me half what the land is worth and expect gratitude for it. Or the one where you imply through your lawyers that a widow alone with 3 children might face certain difficulties. If she refuses. Something dangerous flickered in Marcus's expression. Surprise, maybe. He hadn't expected her to fight back. Good. I was being polite, Grace continued. Her body screamed at her to stop, to lie back down, to conserve whatever strength she had left. She ignored it. But since we're being honest with each other, let me be clear. That land belonged to my husband. It now belongs to his children. I will not sell it. I will not be intimidated into selling it. And I will not pretend to be grateful for threats dressed up as generosity. Silence. Marcus Callahan stared at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. Something he didn't know how to categorize or control. Then he smiled. Cold. Amused. Predatory. Well, he said softly. You're not quite what I expected, Mrs. Whitmore. Not quite at all. He turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a finality that felt like a declaration of war. Jesse let out a breath, ran a hand through his hair, looked at Grace with something in his expression that she couldn't quite name. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said. Probably both. Grace tried to smile, failed. Your father is... And bastard. Yes, I know. Jesse pulled a chair close to her bed, sat down like he intended to stay a while. He wasn't always. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't see it. Either way, I'm sorry. For what he said. For what he implied. For all of it. You don't need to apologize for him. Someone should. Grace studied him in the firelight, the scar on his cheek, the set of his jaw, the way his hands, strong, calloused working hands, rested on his knees like they didn't know how to be still. "Why did you save us?" she asked. "And don't tell me it's because your mother taught you to be decent. I want the real answer." Jesse was quiet for a long moment. "When I was 12, he said finally. "My mother got sick, fever that wouldn't break. My father was off on a cattle drive 3 weeks out at least. The doctor in town wouldn't come. Said he was too busy, but really he just didn't want to treat a Mexican woman, even one married to Marcus Callahan." He paused. His jaw tightened. "I rode out to find someone who would help. Found a homesteader's wife 6 miles east. She came back with me. Sat with my mother for 2 weeks. Brought down the fever. Saved her life." "The Morrisons." "Yeah, the Morrisons." Jesse's voice hardened. "The same family my father drove off their land last month because he wanted their water rights." Grace felt something shift in her understanding. Something she hadn't expected. "You're not like him." "No." Jesse looked at her directly. "I'm not, and I never will be. Whatever else happens between your family and mine, I want you to know that." Whatever else happens. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication, with possibility, with the dangerous, foolish hope that Grace had promised herself she'd never feel again. "I should check on the children," she said, because she had to say something had to break this moment before it became something she couldn't take back. "You should rest." "I should check on the children." Jesse smiled. Small. Sad. Understanding. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and helped her stand. "I reckon you should." The kitchen was warm and bright and full of sounds Grace hadn't heard in months. Laughter. Tommy's high giggle. Sarah's snort of amusement. Even Will's serious Will making a sound that might have been a chuckle if you listened hard enough. They sat around a massive wooden table, bowls of stew in front of them, while a round Mexican woman with kind eyes told them stories about Jesse Callahan as a boy. How he'd once tried to ride a bull and ended up in the creek. How he'd brought home every stray animal he found until the barn was more orphanage than stable. How his mother used to say he had enough love in him for the whole territory if only someone would teach him where to put it. "Ma?" Tommy spotted her first. Launched himself out of his chair and across the room, crashing into her legs with enough force to nearly knock her down. "Careful, mijo," the cook said, but she was smiling. "Your mama's still recovering." "I'm fine." Grace gathered Tommy into her arms, pressed her face into his hair, breathed in the smell of wood smoke and stew and child. "I'm fine. We're all fine." Will stood slowly, walked toward her with that careful measuring gaze he'd developed since his father died. "You scared us," he said quietly. "Don't do that again." "I'll try not to. Promise." Grace looked at this boy. This child who wasn't hers would never be hers by any law or blood or right. This boy who'd stood in front of her in a blizzard, ready to fight a stranger twice his size, ready to die if that's what it took. "I promise," she said. Sarah appeared at her elbow. Didn't say anything, just pressed against Grace's side like she was trying to absorb warmth through proximity. They stood there, the four of them, in a stranger's kitchen, in an enemy's house, in the middle of a storm that wasn't done with them yet. And Grace thought, This is worth fighting for. This is worth dying for. Whatever came next, whatever Marcus Callahan threw at them, whatever schemes he'd already set in motion, whatever price this land and this family would eventually cost her, she would pay it. Because somewhere in the past 3 months, these children had stopped being Jacob Whitmore's obligation and started being her heart. And Grace Whitmore, whatever else she was, had never been a woman who surrendered her heart without a fight. The storm raged for 3 more days. 3 days trapped in Marcus Callahan's house. 3 days of walking on eggshells, of avoiding the man's cold stares across the dinner table, of watching Jesse position himself between his father and Grace's family, like a shield made of flesh and stubbornness. 3 days of something building between them that Grace refused to name. "You're staring again." Grace startled, nearly dropping the cup of coffee she'd been holding for the past 10 minutes without drinking. Sarah stood in the doorway of the small sitting room, arms crossed expression, knowing in a way that made Grace deeply uncomfortable. "I wasn't staring." "You were staring at Mr. Jesse through the window. You've been doing it all morning." "I was looking at the snow." "The snow's behind you, Ma." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. 9 years old. The child was 9 years old and already saw too much. "Shouldn't you be with your brothers?" "Tommy's napping. Will's in the stables with Mr. Jesse learning about horses." Sarah crossed the room, settled into the chair across from Grace with the gravity of a woman 3 times her age. "He likes him. He likes Mr. Jesse." "That's nice." "It's more than nice. Will doesn't like anyone. Not since Papa died. Not since—" Sarah stopped, her small hands twisted in her lap. "Not since you came." The words hit Grace harder than she'd expected. She set down her coffee, leaned forward. "Sarah, do you blame me for what happened to your father?" "No." "Quick. Certain." "Papa was already sad before you came. Sad about Mama. Sad about the farm. Sad about everything. You made him less sad, I think. For a little while." Grace's throat tightened. "I tried." "I know." Sarah's eyes, so much older than they should be, met hers directly. "That's why I don't blame you. You tried. That's more than most folks do." They sat in silence for a moment. The fire crackled. Wind howled against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. "Ma." "Yes." "Are we going to lose the farm?" Grace wanted to lie. Wanted to offer comfort, false promises, the kind of reassurance that would let a 9-year-old sleep without nightmares. But Sarah had earned better than lies. "I don't know," Grace said honestly. "Mr. Callahan, the older one, he wants our land. He's got lawyers and money and power. We've got... not much. We've got you." "Sarah." "We've got you," the girl repeated firmly. "And you don't give up. I've been watching. You're scared all the time, I can tell, but you don't give up. That's got to count for something." Grace reached out, pulled Sarah into her lap. The girl was almost too big for it, all sharp elbows and gangly limbs, but she curled against Grace's chest like she'd been doing it her whole life. "When did you get so wise?" Grace whispered. "Mama used to say I was born 40 years old and just waiting for my body to catch up." Grace laughed. It came out wet, choked with tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Your mama sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Sarah's voice went soft. "You remind me of her sometimes, the way you look at us, like we matter more than anything." "You do. You matter more than anything. Even the farm." Grace pulled back, looked into Sarah's face. "The farm is just dirt and wood. You 3 are my family. Don't ever forget that." Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. "Okay, Ma, I won't forget." The door opened. Jesse stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, hat in his hands. His eyes found Grace immediately, and something warm flickered through his expression before he controlled it. "Ladies, am I interrupting?" "Nope." Sarah scrambled off Grace's lap with the mercurial energy of childhood. "I was just going to check on Tommy. Excuse me, Mr. Jesse." She slipped past him and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Grace alone with the man she'd been trying very hard not to think about. "Your daughter's something else," Jesse said, settling into the chair Sarah had vacated. "She's not—" Grace stopped, started again. "She's not my daughter. Not really. Not legally. Looked pretty real to me just now." Grace didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to explain the complicated tangle of love and guilt and fear that defined her relationship with these children. They weren't hers. Would never be hers in the eyes of the law. But somewhere in the past 3 months, her heart had stopped caring about legality. "Will's got a natural seat," Jesse said, changing the subject, with the grace of someone who understood when to push and when to retreat. Never seen a boy take to riding so fast. You teach him. His father did, before. He talks about Jacob sometimes, when he forgets to be angry. Grace looked up sharply. What does he say? That his pa was a good man, kind, worked hard, loved his children more than anything. Jesse paused. That his pa trusted you to take care of them when he was gone, like he knew something was coming. The words sent ice through Grace's veins. What do you mean knew something was coming? Jesse leaned forward, dropped his voice low. Will said Jacob started acting strange about a month before he died. Nervous, looking over his shoulder. Wouldn't let the children out of his sight. Will asked him once what was wrong, and Jacob said some men wanted what he had and wouldn't stop until they got it. Some men. Grace's voice came out flat, hard. Did he say which men? No, but Will's smart. He's been putting pieces together. Jesse met her eyes. He thinks my father had something to do with Jacob's death. He won't say it out loud, but I can see him thinking it every time he looks at me. Grace felt the world tilt beneath her. She'd suspected. God knows she'd suspected. The timing of Jacob's accident. The immediate pressure to sell. The way everyone in town seemed afraid to talk about what had really happened that day on the North Ridge. But hearing it spoken aloud, even indirectly, made it real in a way that terrified her. Jesse. She said his name for the first time without the Mr. in front of it. Did your father kill my husband? The question hung between them like smoke. Jesse's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists on his knees. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like shame. I don't know. I've asked myself that question every day since Jacob died. My father's capable of it. I wish I could tell you different, but he is. He's done things. Jesse stopped, swallowed hard. He's done things I can't forgive. Things I can't forget. But I can't prove he was involved in Jacob's death. Not yet. Not yet. I've been looking, asking questions, trying to find someone who'll tell me the truth about what happened that day. Jesse's eyes met hers, and Grace saw something fierce burning there. If he did it, Grace, I'll make sure he answers for it. I swear to you. Blood or no blood, some things can't be overlooked. Grace didn't know what to say, didn't know how to reconcile this man, this Callahan, with everything she'd been taught to fear and hate about his family. Why? She asked finally. Why would you turn against your own father for strangers? You're not strangers anymore. Jesse said it simply like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And even if you were, my mother taught me that right is right and wrong is wrong regardless of who's doing it. My father forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. I won't. Footsteps in the hallway. Jesse stood quickly, putting distance between them, and Grace realized how close they'd been sitting, how intimate the conversation had become. Marcus Callahan appeared in the doorway. His eyes moved between them, cataloging, calculating. Something cold flickered across his face. Jesse, I need you in my study, now. I'm in the middle of now. Father and son stared at each other. Grace felt the tension crackling between them, years of conflict compressed into a single look. Jesse turned to her. Excuse me, ma'am. We'll continue this conversation later. He followed his father out. The door closed behind them with a sound like a cell door slamming. Grace sat alone in the silence, her mind racing. Jacob had known something was coming, known he was in danger, known his children might be left alone. And he'd sent for her anyway. Brought her into this mess, this danger, this impossible situation. Why? The question burned in her chest. Why bring a stranger into a family that was already falling apart? Why marry a woman he'd never met when he knew his life might be measured in months instead of years? Unless he'd wanted someone to protect his children after he was gone. Someone from outside. Someone Marcus Callahan couldn't easily threaten or control. Someone like her. Grace stood abruptly, Move to the window. Outside, the snow had finally begun to slow the blizzard, exhausting itself after days of fury. Soon the roads would be passable. Soon Marcus would demand they leave. And then what? Back to the farm. Back to the isolation and the fear and the constant pressure to sell. Back to fighting alone against a man who might have murdered her husband and would certainly destroy her if given the chance, unless she found another way. The thought came unbidden, dangerous, impossible. But once it took root, Grace couldn't shake it loose. Jesse Callahan was her enemy's son. But he was also the only person in this territory with both the power and the willingness to help her. The only person who might be able to protect her family from his own father. If she could trust him, if she dared. The door to the study was thick, but voices carried when men forgot to control their volume. Grace had learned that lesson in Boston, ear pressed to her father's door, listening to the business deals that would eventually bankrupt them. She moved through the hallway now with the same careful silence, stopped outside Marcus Callahan's study, listened. Can't keep doing this, Jesse. Every stray dog, every lost cause, every hopeless case that wanders across your path, it's pathetic. Saving a woman and 3 children from freezing to death isn't pathetic. It's basic human decency. Human decency doesn't build empires. Maybe I don't want to build an empire. A pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had dropped to something dangerous. You will inherit everything I've built. The ranch, the land, the power. You will carry the Callahan name into the next generation. That is not negotiable. And if I refuse, then you'll have nothing. No inheritance, no home, no future. I'll cut you off completely, Jesse. Write you out of everything. You'll be just another saddle tramp working someone else's land for wages. At least I'd be able to look at myself in the mirror. The crack of flesh on flesh was unmistakable. Grace flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. You ungrateful! Marcus's voice shook with rage. Everything I've done for this family, for you, for the legacy your mother was too weak to understand, and too soft to help build. I will not watch you throw it away for some scheming Eastern widow who's probably spreading her legs for every man who... Another sound. Scuffling. Something crashing to the floor. Don't. Jesse's voice had gone cold in a way Grace hadn't heard before. Don't you ever speak about her that way again. You can hit me. You can threaten me. You can cut me off from every penny you own. But if you say one more word against Grace Whitmore, I will walk out that door and never come back. She's gotten to you. Marcus's laugh was ugly. 3 days. 3 days and she's already got you defending her honor like some lovesick fool. I didn't raise you to be this weak. No. You raised me to be just like you. And I spent 20 years trying to make that work before I realized the cost was too high. The cost. What cost? You've had everything. Everything I never had. A name, a legacy, land as far as the eye can see. And no one who loves me for anything other than what I can give them. Jesse's voice cracked. You want to know what I learned from watching you, Father? I learned that money can't buy loyalty. Power can't buy respect. And building an empire on other people's broken lives doesn't make you successful. It makes you alone. Silence stretched between them. Grace held her breath, pressed against the wall, heart hammering so hard she was certain they could hear it. Get out. Marcus's voice was flat. Dead. Get out of my study and stay away from that woman. The storm's breaking. Tomorrow she leaves. And if I find out you've been helping her, if I find out you've done anything to interfere with my acquisition of that property, you'll what? Disown me. You've been threatening that for years. I'll make sure she loses everything. Not just the land, the children. I have friends on the Territorial Council. Friends who'd be very interested in the legality of an unmarried woman claiming custody of children that aren't hers by blood or law. Grace's blood turned to ice. You wouldn't. Try me. Marcus's voice was smug now, confident. The voice of a man who'd found his opponent's weakness and intended to exploit it. Leave her alone, Jesse. For her sake, if not for yours. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some people aren't worth saving. Footsteps approached the door. Grace barely managed to slip around the corner before it opened. She pressed herself against the wall, not breathing, as Jesse's boots echoed past her down the hallway. He didn't see her. Didn't know she'd heard everything. Didn't know that his father had just revealed exactly how far he was willing to go and exactly what weapon he intended to use. The children. Not the land. Not the farm. Not even Grace herself. The children. Grace waited until the house went quiet. Then she moved silent as a ghost toward the kitchen, where she'd seen paper and ink earlier. She had letters to write, plans to make, a war to prepare for. Because Marcus Callahan had just made a fatal mistake. He'd threatened the only thing Grace Whitmore would kill to protect, and she had no intention of letting him win. The cook Rosa Grace had learned her name was found her at the kitchen table 2 hours later, surrounded by crumpled paper and empty inkwells. Senora. Rosa's voice was soft, concerned. It's past midnight. You should be sleeping. I can't sleep. Grace didn't look up from the letter she was writing. Not yet. Rosa moved closer, peered at the papers spread across the table. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the names at the top of each letter. Judge Theodore Blackwood, Reverend Ezra Grant, the Territorial Land Commissioner. You are preparing for battle, Rosa said quietly. I'm preparing to survive. Rosa pulled out a chair, sat down across from Grace with the ease of someone who'd spent decades in this kitchen, and answered to no one but herself. The old man. He threatened you. It wasn't a question. Grace looked up, met Rosa's knowing eyes. You heard? I hear everything in this house. The walls, they talk to those who know how to listen. Rosa's weathered hands folded on the table. He is a cruel man, Senor Callahan. He was not always so. But grief and guilt, they twist a person. Make them into something their younger self wouldn't recognize. Grief and guilt over what? Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes drifted to the darkness beyond the window, to memories Grace couldn't see. His wife, Jesse's mother, Maria. The name came out tender, reverent. She was my cousin. I came to this house because of her 30 years ago. Watched her try to soften him. Watched her fail. Grace set down her pen. What happened to her? She died. 8 years ago. A fever that wouldn't break. Rosa's voice hardened. The doctor in town wouldn't come. Said he was too busy, but really he just didn't want to treat a Mexican woman, even one married to the most powerful man in the territory. Jesse told me about the homesteader's wife who saved her. Ah, Mrs. Morrison, yes. She was a good woman, kind. Rosa's expression darkened. And now she and her husband are gone. Driven off their land by the same man Maria spent 20 years trying to civilize. Marcus. He wasn't always a monster, Senora. But losing Maria, it broke something in him. The part that knew how to love without possessing. The part that understood that some things matter more than land and money and power. Rosa reached across the table, covered Grace's hand with her own. Jesse has that part. He got it from his mother. It's the best thing in him. I know. Grace's voice came out rougher than she intended. I've seen it. Then you understand why he does what he does. Why he saved you. Why he defies his father. Rosa squeezed her hand. He sees his mother in you, I think. The same strength, the same fire, the same refusal to be broken by men who think cruelty is the same as power. Grace felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back. I'm not strong. I'm terrified all the time. That is what strength is, Nina. Being terrified and still fighting, still protecting what matters, still refusing to surrender even when everything tells you to give up. They sat in silence for a moment. The kitchen was warm, quiet, a pocket of peace in a house full of danger. The letters, Rosa said finally. They're a good start. But letters won't be enough. You need allies, people who will stand with you when Marcus makes his move. I don't have allies. I've been here 3 months. I barely know anyone. Then you need to change that. Rosa stood, moved to a cabinet, pulled out a piece of paper covered in neat handwriting. Here, names of people Marcus has wronged, homesteaders he's cheated, workers he's mistreated, people who would love nothing more than to see him humbled. Grace took the paper, stared at the list of names. Why are you helping me? Because my cousin would have wanted me to. Because Jesse loves you, even if he's too foolish to say it yet. And because some fights are worth fighting even when you can't see how to win. Jesse doesn't love me. We barely know each other. Rosa's smile was ancient knowing. You don't need years to know someone's heart, Senora. Sometimes you only need to see them fight for something, to see what they're willing to lose. She moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Sleep now. Tomorrow the roads will clear and you'll need your strength. The real battle is just beginning. She disappeared into the darkness of the house. Grace sat alone, Rosa's list in one hand, her unfinished letters in the other. The fire had burned down to embers, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt something else instead. Something that had been missing since she'd stepped off the train in this God-forsaken territory. Hope. Not much. Just a flicker. But enough. Enough to keep fighting. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could protect the children who'd become hers. Could build a life in this harsh land. Could find a way to win against an enemy who held all the cards. She looked at Rosa's list again. Then she picked up her pen and started writing. The sun rose pale and cold over the Callahan ranch. The storm had passed, leaving behind drifts of snow that sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. Grace stood at the window of her guest room, watching ranch hands dig out the paths and clear the road that would take her back to the farm. Back to uncertainty. Back to fear. Back to fighting alone. A knock at the door. She turned to find Will standing in the hallway, his face troubled. Ma, can we talk? Of course. She stepped aside, let him enter. What's wrong? Will didn't answer immediately. He moved to the window, stood where she'd been standing, stared out at the white world beyond. I heard them last night, he said quietly. Mr. Callahan and Jesse, fighting. Grace's stomach dropped. Will, I heard what he said. The old man. Will's hands curled into fists at his sides. About you. About us. About taking us away. You shouldn't have been listening. I know. Will turned to face her. His eyes, so much like Jacob's, were bright with anger and fear. But I was. And now I need to know. Can he do it? Can he really take us away from you? Grace wanted to lie. Wanted to protect him from this truth, the way she'd tried to protect him from every hard truth since she'd arrived. But Will had earned honesty. Had earned the right to know exactly what they were facing. Maybe, she said. Legally, I'm not your mother. Your father and I were married, but the paperwork was never properly filed. And even if it had been, I'm not your blood relation. If someone powerful enough challenged my custody, someone like Marcus Callahan. Yes. Will was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked, processing, deciding. Then we don't let him, he said finally. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Will stepped toward her, and Grace saw something shift in his expression. Something she'd been waiting 3 months to see. You're our ma now. You've been our ma since you stayed. Since you didn't run when Papa died. Since you held us together when everything was falling apart. His voice cracked. Steadied. Sarah loves you. Tommy barely remembers Mama anymore. You're all he knows. And I... He stopped, swallowed hard. I was angry at first. When Papa brought you here, I thought he was trying to replace her, trying to forget. Will, let me finish. His chin came up, that Whitmore stubbornness shining through. I was angry. But then I watched you. The way you work yourself to exhaustion for us. The way you teach Sarah her letters, even when you're barely standing. The way you hold Tommy when he has nightmares like losing him would break you." Will's eyes met hers, and Grace saw tears there that he was fighting desperately not to shed. "You love us. Really love us. Not because you have to, but because you chose to. And if Marcus Callahan thinks he can take that away—" Will's voice hardened. "Then he's got another thing coming. Because I'll fight. I'll fight anyone who tries to tear this family apart." Grace crossed the space between them, pulled this boy, this brave, broken, beautiful boy, into her arms, held him while he shook, while he finally let himself cry, while months of grief and anger and fear poured out of him in great heaving sobs. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got all of you. And no one, not Marcus Callahan, not anyone, is going to change that." Will clung to her, 12 years old and terrified, and finally letting himself need her. "Promise." His voice came out small, young, the voice of the child he'd been forced to stop being too soon. "I promise." They stood there as the sun rose higher, as the sounds of the ranch waking filtered through the windows, as the world outside prepared for whatever came next. And Grace Whitmore made a vow to herself, silent and fierce and unbreakable. She would find a way. She would fight with everything she had. She would build alliances and gather evidence and prove to the world that this family was hers. And if Marcus Callahan tried to take her children, she would burn his empire to the ground. Some things were worth any price. These 3 children were worth everything. They left the Callahan ranch at noon. Marcus stood on the porch watching them go, his face carved from stone, his eyes following the wagon until it disappeared around the bend in the road. Grace felt his gaze on her back long after she could no longer see him. Jesse had insisted on driving them. His father had forbidden it. Jesse had done it anyway. "You're going to pay for this," Grace said quietly as the ranch house vanished behind them. "He'll punish you for helping us." "Probably." Jesse's jaw was set, his hands steady on the reins. "Don't much care." "You should care. He's your father. This is your inheritance." "Some inheritances cost too much." Jesse glanced at her sideways. "Besides, I've been paying for things my whole life. Might as well pay for something that matters." Tommy had fallen asleep against Grace's side, exhausted from the morning's excitement. Sarah sat in the wagon bed with Will, both of them quiet, watching the landscape pass with the wary eyes of children who'd learned that safety was temporary. "What happens now?" Grace asked. "When we get back to the farm?" "Now you prepare." Jesse's voice was grim. "My father doesn't make idle threats. If he said he'd challenge your custody, he'll do it. You need to get your papers in order. Find witnesses who can speak to your character. Build a case before he does." "I've already started." Grace touched the pocket where she'd tucked Rosa's list and her own letters. "But I need to know what I'm up against. How does he do it? How does he take land from people?" Jesse was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of things he wished he didn't know. "He finds weaknesses, incomplete filings, disputed boundaries, legal technicalities most folks don't even know exist. Then, he sends his lawyers in, like wolves buries people in paperwork and court fees, until they can't fight anymore. And if the paperwork is solid, then he finds other ways." Jesse's hands tightened on the reins. "Accidents, fires, livestock gone missing, things that can't be traced back to him but make life impossible enough that folks give up and sell." Grace felt ice slide down her spine. "Is that what happened to Jacob?" The silence stretched between them. Jesse stared straight ahead, his profile hard against the winter sky. "I don't know for certain, but his death came awful convenient, right when he was about to file the final papers on your water rights." Jesse's voice dropped, right when he stopped being a minor annoyance and started being a real obstacle. "Then Marcus killed him." "I can't prove it, yet." Jesse turned to look at her, and Grace saw something burning in his eyes, something that looked like a promise. "But I'm going to find out the truth, Grace. Whatever it takes, whoever it costs. They rode in silence after that. The children dozed. The horses plodded through snow that was already melting under weak winter sun. And Grace stared at the road ahead, trying to see the shape of the battle to come. The farm looked smaller than she remembered. 3 months ago, when she'd first arrived, the cabin had seemed like a decent enough start. Rough-hewn logs, a solid roof, room enough for a family to grow into. Now, seeing it through eyes that had spent 3 days in Marcus Callahan's mansion, it looked like what it was, a vulnerable little homestead perched on land that a powerful man wanted. Jesse helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet." Jesse's eyes swept the property, cataloging, assessing. "You've got a lot of work ahead. That fence line needs shoring up. The barn door's hanging loose, and you're going to need more firewood before the next cold snap. I can handle it." "I know you can." Jesse's voice softened. "But you don't have to handle it alone." Grace stepped back, putting distance between them. She could feel Will watching from the wagon bed, his eyes sharp and knowing. "Yes, I do. If your father finds out you've been helping me." "He already knows." Jesse shrugged, a gesture that tried for casual, and landed somewhere closer to resigned. "Rosa told me this morning. He's had men watching the roads, counting the hours I spend away from the ranch." His mouth twisted. "He's been keeping track of his investment, making sure I don't do anything to depreciate my value." The bitterness in his voice made Grace's chest ache. "Jesse, it's fine." He cut her off, clearly not wanting sympathy. "I've been living under his watch my whole life. I'm used to it." Will jumped down from the wagon landing with a crunch in the snow. "Mr. Jesse, can I talk to you a minute?" Jesse glanced at Grace, then nodded. "Sure, son." They walked a few paces away, heads bent together in conversation Grace couldn't hear. She watched Will gesture toward the barn, toward the house, toward her. Watched Jesse nod, his expression growing more serious with each word. When they returned, Will's face had changed. Some of the wariness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "He's going to teach me," Will announced. "How to shoot proper, how to track, how to protect the farm if anyone comes." "Will," Grace started. "He's right to want to learn." Jesse's voice was matter-of-fact. "Boy his age living out here with no man around. He needs to know how to defend what's his." "He's 12 years old. I was 10 when my father put a rifle in my hands." Jesse met her eyes. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's necessary. This isn't Boston, Grace. Out here, being able to protect yourself isn't a luxury. It's survival." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to wrap Will in cotton and pretend the world wasn't as dangerous as it was. But she'd learned better. The blizzard had taught her. Jacob's death had taught her. 3 months of fighting to keep this family together had taught her. "Twice a week," she said finally, "after chores are done. And I want to learn too." Jesse's eyebrows rose. "You... If my son's going to learn to protect this family, I'm not going to stand around being useless." Grace lifted her chin. "Unless you think a woman can't handle a rifle." Something flickered in Jesse's expression. Surprise, maybe, or admiration. "No, ma'am," he said slowly. "I reckon a woman can handle just about anything she sets her mind to." The first letter came 3 days later. Grace recognized the seal before she opened it. Official, territorial, the kind of document that changed lives and destroyed families. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper, read the words once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might change their meaning. "Ma." Sarah had appeared at her elbow. "What is it?" "Nothing." Grace forced her voice steady. "Just some legal business. Why don't you go help Will with the chickens?" Sarah didn't move. Her eyes, too knowing, too old, stayed fixed on Grace's face. "It's from him, isn't it, Mr. Callahan?" "Sarah." "I'm not stupid, Ma. I know what's happening." Sarah's small hand found Grace's. "I know he wants to take us away from you." Grace looked at this child. This fierce, brilliant, terrifying child who saw everything and understood more than any 9-year-old should. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's from him, or his lawyers anyway." "What does it say?" Grace looked at the letter again, the formal language, the legal terminology, the deadline that gave her exactly 30 days to respond. "It says he's challenging my right to custody of you three. Claims that since I'm not your blood relative and my marriage to your father was never properly registered, I have no legal standing to keep you." Sarah's grip tightened. "That's not true." "The law doesn't care about true. It cares about paperwork." Grace folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her pocket. "But we're not going to let him win. We're going to fight this." "How?" Grace thought about Rosa's list, about the letters she'd sent, about Jesse who'd already promised to help, even though it was costing him everything. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I'll figure it out. I always figure it out." Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay, Ma. I trust you." 3 simple words. They hit Grace harder than the legal threat, harder than Marcus Callahan's schemes, harder than anything had hit her since she'd arrived in this godforsaken territory. I trust you. She'd spent 3 months trying to earn that trust. 3 months of work and worry and sleepless nights. 3 months of fighting to prove she belonged in these children's lives. And now, when everything was about to fall apart, Sarah had given her the only thing that mattered. Grace pulled the girl into her arms, held her tight. "I won't let him take you," she whispered. "I promise, whatever it takes, I won't let him take any of you." Jesse came that evening riding hard up the road like something was chasing him. Grace met him on the porch, her heart hammering at the urgency in his approach. Behind her, she could hear Will herding the younger children into the back room following the emergency protocol they'd established after the letter arrived. "What's wrong?" Grace demanded. "What happened?" Jesse swung down from his horse, barely bothering to tie the reins before he was on the porch taking her by the shoulders. "My father, he's moved faster than I expected." Jesse's breath came harsh, his eyes wild. "He's called in Judge Patterson from the territorial seat. Got him coming out next week for an emergency custody hearing." "Next week?" Grace's voice cracked. "That's not enough time. I haven't even found a lawyer yet." "I know, that's why he did it." Jesse's grip tightened. "Grace, listen to me. Patterson is in my father's pocket. Has been for years. If this goes to a hearing with him presiding, you'll lose. There's no way around it." The words hit her like physical blows. Lose. Lose the children. Lose everything. "Then what do I do?" The question came out broken. Desperate. "Jesse, what the hell do I do?" "You fight." Jesse's voice was fierce. "But you fight smart. You don't show up to a hearing you can't win. You delay. You find grounds to challenge Patterson's jurisdiction. You buy time until we can get a fair judge." "How? I don't know anything about territorial law." "I do." Jesse released her shoulders, took a breath. "My mother made me study it. Said a man needed to understand the rules before he could break them." His mouth twisted. "I don't think this is what she had in mind, but it'll have to do." Grace stared at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like a miracle, who kept showing up when she needed him most, who was risking everything for a woman he barely knew. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why are you doing all this?" Jesse was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved over her face, searching for something she couldn't name. "Because it's right," he said finally. "Because someone has to stand up to him. Because—" He stopped. Started again. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Someone who'd die before she let those children down. Someone who... Jesse. Someone I could love if I let myself. The words came out rough, raw. If I thought I had any right to love anyone. Grace's breath caught. The air between them felt charged electric, heavy with possibility and fear. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "You saved my children's lives. You've put yourself between us and your father's cruelty over and over again. If that doesn't give you the right to love, I don't know what does." "It's not that simple." "Nothing's simple. That doesn't mean it's not real." Jesse's hand came up, touched her cheek with a gentleness that made her want to weep. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and Grace felt something shift inside her. Some wall she'd built after Jacob's death. Some protection she'd wrapped around her heart. "I can't promise you anything," Jesse whispered. "My father's not going to stop. This fight's going to get worse before it gets better. I might lose everything. I might end up with nothing to offer you but a bad name and a burned bridge. I don't need you to offer me anything." Grace covered his hand with her own. "I just need you to keep showing up. Can you do that?" "Yeah," Jesse's voice cracked. "I can do that." The door behind them creaked open. Will stood there, rifle in his hands, eyes moving between them with an expression that was equal parts suspicious and hopeful. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. Grace stepped back from Jesse, but didn't let go of his hand. "Everything's fine." Jesse brought news about the hearing. Bad news. Complicated news. Grace squeezed Jesse's fingers, then released them. "We've got planning to do. All of us." They gathered around the kitchen table as the night deepened. Grace, Jesse, Will. Even Sarah, who refused to be sent to bed no matter how many times Grace tried. "The custody hearing is set for next Thursday," Jesse explained, spreading papers across the scarred wooden surface. "My father's using an old territorial statute that allows emergency proceedings when children's welfare is allegedly at risk." "Allegedly?" Will's voice was sharp. "We're not at risk. We're fine. I know that. You know that. But my father's lawyers are claiming that an unmarried woman without blood relation or legal standing can't properly care for 3 children. Jesse's jaw tightened. "They're going to argue that you'd be better off in an orphanage or with blood relatives back east." "We don't have blood relatives back east," Sarah said. "Mama's family disowned her when she married Papa, and Papa's brother died in the war. They'll find someone, or they'll claim to." Jesse looked at Grace. "The point isn't whether the placement is actually better. The point is to take you away from Grace and put you somewhere my father can control." "Why?" Will demanded. "Why does he hate us so much?" "He doesn't hate you." Jesse's voice was tired. "He doesn't even think about you. You're just obstacles, things standing between him and what he wants." "The water rights," Grace said quietly. "Yeah. Your land controls access to the only year-round creek in this valley. Right now, my father has to pay easement fees every time he waters his cattle. If he owns your property, he controls the water for 50 miles in every direction. So this is all about money." Will's disgust was palpable. "He'd destroy our family for money. He'd destroy anything for money." Jesse met the boy's eyes. "That's what I'm trying to warn you about. My father doesn't think like normal people. He doesn't see families or lives or love. He sees assets and obstacles, and he removes obstacles by any means necessary." The table went quiet. Grace looked at her children because that's what they were, her children, blood be damned, and saw fear in their faces. Fear they were trying to hide. Fear she shared down to her bones. "We need to delay the hearing," she said firmly. "Jesse said we can challenge Patterson's jurisdiction." "How?" "There's a procedural requirement that both parties have to be notified at least 14 days before an emergency custody proceeding." Jesse pulled out a document pointed to a specific clause. "You were served 3 days ago. The hearing's set for 11 days from now. That's only 14 days total, and the law requires 14 days from notification, not from filing." That's a technicality. That's the law. Patterson might try to push through anyway, but if we file an objection with the territorial court, we can force a postponement. How long? 30 days. Maybe more if we're lucky. Jesse's eyes met hers. It's not a solution, but it's time. Time to find you a real lawyer. Time to gather evidence. Time to build a case that even my father can't buy his way out of. Grace nodded slowly. 30 days. It wasn't much, but it was something. What else? She asked. What else can we do? Jesse hesitated, glanced at Will and Sarah, clearly weighing how much to say in front of them. Spit it out, Will said flatly. We're not babies. We can handle whatever it is. Fine. Jesse took a breath. There's another option. Faster, more permanent, but risky. What is it? Jesse looked at Grace, held her gaze with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You could get married. The words hung in the air. Sarah's eyes went wide. Will made a choking sound. Married? Grace heard her own voice as if from a great distance. To who? To someone who could adopt the children legally. Someone with standing in the territory. Someone my father couldn't easily challenge. Jesse's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes burned. Someone like me. The silence that followed was deafening. You can't be serious, Grace finally managed. I'm completely serious. Jesse leaned forward. Think about it. If we're married, I become the children's legal stepfather. My father can't argue you lack standing because you'd have my name, my position, my family's. He laughed bitterly. Respected place in territorial society. He'd disown you. Probably. He'd cut you off from everything. Almost certainly. He'd make your life a living hell. He already does. Jesse's voice was quiet, certain. Grace, I've spent my whole life trying to be the son he wanted. Trying to earn approval that was never going to come. Trying to change him from inside a system designed to protect him. He shook his head. I'm done. I'm done pretending that I can fix something this broken. I'm done watching him hurt people and telling myself it's not my responsibility. So you'd marry me out of spite to get back at your father? No. Jesse reached across the table, took her hand. I'd marry you because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because those children deserve a family, and you've given them one. Because when I think about the future, the only version I want is one where I wake up next to you. Grace's throat tightened. Jesse, we've known each other for a week. I know. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I know it's crazy. I know it's too fast. I know there are 100 reasons to say no. His grip tightened. But I also know that I've never been more sure of anything in my life. When I saw you in that snow, holding those children, refusing to give up, even when you couldn't stand, something changed. Something I can't take back. Ma. Sarah's voice was small, but steady. I think you should say yes. Grace turned to look at her daughter. Sarah. I know it's fast. I know it's scary. But he's good, Ma. He's good the way Papa was good. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. And we need someone good on our side right now. Will hadn't spoken. Grace looked at him waiting. His opinion mattered. His acceptance would make or break whatever decision she made. Will. The boy was silent for a long moment. His jaw worked. His hands clenched on the table. He saved us, Will said finally. In the blizzard. He didn't have to. He could have ridden past, pretended he didn't see us. He looked at Jesse with something that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't suspicion either. You didn't, though. You stopped. You helped. I did. Why? Jesse met the boy's gaze steadily. Because it was right. Because my mother taught me that some things matter more than comfort or convenience, or what's easy. He paused. Because when I saw your family in that snow, I saw something worth saving. Will was quiet for another long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay," he said. "If Ma says yes, I won't fight it." His eyes hardened. "But if you hurt her, if you hurt any of us, I'll kill you myself. I don't care how big you are." "Fair enough." Jesse's voice carried no offense, only respect. "I'd expect nothing less." Grace looked at her family, at Jesse, at the impossible situation they'd found themselves in and the even more impossible solution being offered. A week ago she'd been a stranger, a mail-order bride pretending to be a mother, a Boston woman drowning in a world she didn't understand. Now she was being asked to marry again. To bind herself to another man, another family, another set of complications and dangers and hopes. But this time, it would be her choice, her decision, her future. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I'll marry you." Jesse's face transformed. Hope and joy and fear all tangled together in an expression that made her heart clench. "Are you sure?" "No." Grace laughed, slightly hysterical. "I'm not sure of anything. But I know I trust you. And I know these children need protection. And I know—" She swallowed hard. "I know I don't want to fight this battle alone." Jesse stood, circled the table, pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "You won't," he promised against her hair. "You'll never be alone again." Behind them, Sarah made a small sound of satisfaction. Will muttered something that might have been approval, or might have been resignation, and Grace Whitmore held on to the man who'd saved her life and let herself believe just for a moment that everything might actually be okay. They had 30 days to prepare, 30 days to build a defense, 30 days to turn a desperate arrangement into something that might actually survive what was coming. And somewhere in the darkness, Marcus Callahan was already planning his next move. The wedding happened 3 days later. Not in a church. Not with flowers or music or any of the trappings Grace had once imagined for herself back in Boston when she'd been young enough to believe in fairy tales. They stood in Reverend Grant's parlor with Will and Sarah as witnesses. Tommy fidgeting in his Sunday clothes and spoke vows that felt both desperate and sacred. "Do you, Jesse Marcus Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Grace Elizabeth Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Grace looked at Jesse, at the hope burning in his gray eyes, at the future stretching between them, uncertain and terrifying, and somehow still worth reaching for. "I do." Reverend Grant pronounced them married. Jessie kissed her soft, questioning nothing like the possessive claims she'd braced herself for, and Grace felt something shift in her chest. Some lock clicking open, some door swinging wide. "Ma'am," Jessie murmured against her lips, "I believe you're stuck with me now." "I believe I am." They signed the papers. Reverend Grant witnessed his signature steady and sure. Whatever came next, this document was legal. Binding. Real. Marcus Callahan could challenge many things. He couldn't challenge this. The news traveled fast. By sundown, half the territory knew that Jesse Callahan had married the Whitmore widow. By the following morning, the other half had opinions about it. Grace heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies. Saw the looks, the judgment, the speculation. Gold digger. Schemer. The woman who'd trapped Marcus Callahan's heir into marriage to save her own skin. She ignored them. Let them talk. Words couldn't hurt her. Only actions could, and she'd learned to watch for those. "They're saying terrible things." Sarah had come home from the general store with red-rimmed eyes and clenched fists. "Mrs. Patterson called you I know what she called me." Grace kept her voice calm, steady. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. You're not any of those things. You're good. You're—" "Sarah." Grace knelt, took her daughter's hands. "Listen to me. People are going to say cruel things. They're going to judge us based on what they think they know, not what's true. We can't control that. We can only control how we respond. How do we respond? By proving them wrong. By being exactly who we are and letting the truth speak for itself. Grace squeezed Sarah's fingers. Can you do that? Can you hold your head high and know that we're doing what's right, even when others don't understand? Sarah sniffled, squared her shoulders. Yes, ma'am. I can do that. That's my girl. The first real blow came a week after the wedding. Jesse rode up to the farm with a face like thunder, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. Grace met him on the porch, her heart already sinking at his expression. What happened? My father. Jesse's voice was tight with controlled fury. He's filed a motion to have our marriage annulled. Claims it was fraudulent. Claims you coerced me under duress. Can he do that? He can try. Jesse pulled a document from his saddlebag, handed it to her. His lawyers are arguing that I wasn't of sound mind, that the stress of the blizzard and watching you nearly die impaired my judgment. Grace read the motion. The legal language blurred before her eyes, but the meaning was clear enough. Marcus wasn't just attacking her custody of the children anymore. He was attacking the marriage itself, attacking every protection they'd tried to build. This is insane, she said. You're 32 years old. You're not some boy who can be declared incompetent. My father's lawyers are very good at making insane things sound reasonable. Jesse's jaw tightened. And Judge Patterson owes my father enough favors to overlook a few logical problems. So what do? We fight. Jesse took her hands, his grip fierce. We file countermotions. We delay. We make this as complicated and public as possible. His eyes met hers. And we find the evidence we need to prove what my father really is. Evidence of what? Jesse was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. I've been asking questions. Quietly. About Jacob's death. He glanced toward the house, making sure no children were in earshot. There was a witness, Grace. Someone who saw what really happened that day on the North Ridge. Grace's heart stopped. Who? A ranch hand named Miguel Reyes. He was working the fence line when Jacob's horse spooked. He saw everything. Jesse's expression darkened. And he says the horse didn't just spook. Someone fired a shot from the tree line. Deliberately. Murder. The word came out barely audible. You're saying Jacob was murdered? I'm saying someone wanted him dead, and they made it look like an accident. Jesse's hands tightened on hers. Miguel was too scared to talk at first. My father pays his wages. But Rosa reached out to him, convinced him that silence was just another form of complicity. Will he testify? If we can protect him, if we can guarantee he won't lose his job, his home, his family's security. Jesse's voice hardened. That's the leverage my father uses. Fear, dependency, the knowledge that crossing him means losing everything. Grace thought about the other names on Rosa's list. The homesteaders Marcus had cheated, the workers he'd mistreated, the families he'd destroyed. Then we give them something else, she said slowly. We give them hope. We show them that Marcus Callahan can be beaten. How? We win. Grace lifted her chin, felt something fierce and certain settling into her bones. We win this fight. We prove that standing up to him doesn't have to mean losing everything. We become the example that makes other people brave enough to tell their stories. Jesse stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. Admiration, maybe, or awe. You're remarkable, he said quietly. You know that I'm desperate. Grace managed a smile. Desperate people do remarkable things. They spent the next 2 weeks building their case. Jesse tracked down witnesses. Grace wrote letters to every official who might listen. Will rode to neighboring homesteads delivering messages and gathering support. Even Sarah contributed her neat handwriting copying documents that needed to be filed in triplicate. They found a lawyer, Samuel Harrison, a thin, intense man who'd made his reputation defending the powerless against the powerful. He arrived at the farm on a gray February morning, reviewed their evidence, and pronounced it promising but insufficient. You have testimony that suggests foul play in Jacob Whitmore's death, Harrison said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. You have evidence of Marcus Callahan's pattern of land acquisition through intimidation. You have a valid marriage certificate and a documented history of caring for these children. That sounds like enough, Will said. It's not. Harrison's eyes were kind, but honest. Marcus Callahan has money connections and a judge in his pocket. We need more than suggestions and patterns. We need proof. Something concrete that ties him directly to criminal activity. What kind of proof? Grace asked. Documents, correspondence, financial records showing payments to the men who might have killed your husband. Harrison paused. The kind of things a man like Marcus Callahan would keep very, very secure. Jesse had gone still. Grace looked at him, saw something working behind his eyes. I might know where to find those records, he said slowly. Where? My father's study. There's a safe behind his desk. I've seen him open it a few times when he thought no one was watching. Jesse's expression hardened. He keeps his real business in there. The things he doesn't want anyone to see. That's breaking and entering, Harrison said carefully. Any evidence obtained illegally would be inadmissible in court. I'm his son. It's not breaking in if I have a right to be there. Jesse. Grace touched his arm. If he catches you, he won't. Jesse's jaw set with determination. The Territorial Cattle Association meets next week. My father never misses it. He'll be gone for 3 days. And if the safe is locked? Jesse's smile was grim. I've been watching him open it for 15 years. I know the combination. The night Jesse went to the Callahan ranch, Grace couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the door, counting minutes that felt like hours. Will had tried to stay up with her, but she'd sent him to bed around midnight. The boy needed rest. Whatever happened, he needed to be strong for his siblings. The fire had burned down to embers when she heard hoofbeats. Grace was on her feet before the sound fully registered, her hand finding the rifle by the door. She'd learned to shoot over the past weeks. Jesse had taught her patient and thorough. But the weight of the weapon still felt foreign in her hands. The door opened. Jesse stepped through. Snow dusting his shoulders, a leather satchel clutched against his chest. Did you find it? Grace demanded. I found everything. Jesse's voice was strange, hollow. Grace, it's worse than we thought. He crossed to the table, opened the satchel, began spreading papers across the scarred wood. Letters, ledgers, photographs. Document after document, each one more damning than the last. Payment records to 2 men named Dalton and Reeves. $3,000, dated 2 weeks before Jacob died. Jesse's hand trembled as he pointed. A letter from Judge Patterson acknowledging receipt of campaign contributions and promising favorable rulings. Correspondence with the Territorial Land Commissioner about accelerating claim reviews. Grace picked up one of the photographs, stared at it without comprehension. That's the Morrison homestead, Jesse said quietly. The one my father claimed the Morrisons abandoned voluntarily. He pointed to a figure in the image. That's Dalton, standing in front of the burning barn. He burned them out. He burned everyone out. Anyone who wouldn't sell, who wouldn't be intimidated, who stood in his way. Jesse's voice cracked. Grace, there are records here going back 20 years, dozens of families, hundreds of lives destroyed. Grace felt the world tilting beneath her feet. She'd known Marcus Callahan was ruthless, had suspected he was criminal. But this was something else entirely. This was systematic destruction. This was evil wearing a respectable face. We have to show this to Harrison, she said. We have to... There's more. Jesse's hand found hers gripped tight. The payment to Dalton and Reeves, the $3,000. There's a note attached. He handed her the paper. Grace read it once, read it again. For services rendered re Whitmore problem. Ensure it looks accidental. The paper fell from her nerveless fingers. He killed Jacob. Her voice came out as a whisper. He actually killed him. Not just arranged it. Not just looked the other way. He paid for it. He planned it. Grace. He murdered my husband. The whisper became a scream. Something broke inside her, some dam she'd been holding together with will and prayer and stubborn refusal to feel. He murdered Jacob, and then he came to me. He sat in his house and threatened to take my children. He smiled at me across his dinner table and talked about legal procedure while I was eating food paid for by my husband's blood. Jessie caught her as her knees gave out, held her as she wept as rage and grief and horror poured out of her in great wrenching sobs. He didn't speak, didn't try to comfort her with words, just held on steady and solid until the storm passed and she could breathe again. "I'm sorry." Grace pulled back, wiping her face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." Jessie's voice was rough. "Don't ever apologize for feeling what you feel. What do we do now? Now." Jessie's expression hardened into something Grace hadn't seen before. Something dangerous. "Now we destroy him." The hearing was scheduled for March 15th. Not a custody hearing anymore. The evidence Jessie had found had changed everything. Harrison had taken the documents to the territorial marshal, who had opened a formal investigation. Marcus Callahan was facing charges of conspiracy, fraud, and murder. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He's claiming the documents are forged. Harrison's voice crackled with frustration as he briefed them the night before the hearing. His lawyers are arguing that Jessie fabricated everything to steal his inheritance. "That's absurd," Grace said. "The handwriting matches. The dates can be verified." "I know. But Marcus has experts who'll testify otherwise. He has Judge Patterson, who's been recused from this case, thank God, but still has influence making calls on his behalf." Harrison spread his hands. "This is going to come down to credibility. Whose story the jury believes? Then we make them believe ours." Jessie's voice was calm. "Certain. We bring in Miguel Reyes. We bring in every homesteader my father ever cheated. We build a picture so clear that no amount of expert testimony can obscure it." "That's a lot of witnesses. My father destroyed a lot of lives." The courtroom was packed. Grace had never seen so many people crammed into a single space. Homesteaders from across the territory, ranch hands who'd worked for Marcus for decades, townspeople who'd heard whispers for years and never quite believed them, and in the front row, sitting like a king surveying his domain, Marcus Callahan himself. He looked older than Grace remembered, smaller somehow without his mansion surrounding him, but his eyes were the same cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. "All rise," the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Theodore Blackwood presiding. Blackwood was nothing like Patterson. No bought allegiance in his bearing, no deference to power in his gaze. He took his seat, reviewed the papers before him, and looked out at the assembled crowd with the air of a man who intended to dispense justice regardless of who it inconvenienced. "We are here today to consider evidence in the matter of territorial authority versus Marcus Callahan," Blackwood announced. "The defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, intimidation, and various other offenses related to the acquisition of property in this territory." "How does the defendant plead?" Marcus's lawyer rose, a polished man from back east, clearly expensive, clearly confident. "Not guilty, Your Honor. And we move to dismiss on grounds that the evidence was obtained illegally." Motion denied. Blackwood didn't even look up. "The evidence was obtained by a family member with legitimate access to the premises. There's no legal basis for exclusion." Something flickered across Marcus's face, the first crack in his composure. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. Documents authenticated by independent experts. Financial records traced through territorial banks. The damning letter about services rendered re Whitmore problem read aloud to a courtroom so silent Grace could hear her own heartbeat. Then came the witnesses. Miguel Reyes, his voice shaking, but his words clear, describing the shot he'd heard before Jacob's horse spooked. The angle of the sound. The figure he'd seen disappearing into the trees. The Hendersons from the trading post testifying to Jacob's fear in his final weeks. The questions he'd asked about legal protections. the will he'd drafted just days before his death, leaving everything to my beloved wife Grace, who I trust to protect my children. Homesteader after homesteader, each with their own story of intimidation and loss. Burned barns, poisoned wells, threats delivered by men who were never seen again. And finally, devastatingly, Rosa. The old woman walked to the witness stand with the dignity of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. She sat straight, met Marcus's eyes without flinching, and began to speak. I came to this territory 30 years ago. Rosa said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. I came because my cousin Maria had married a powerful man. I thought I was coming to help her build a good life. And what did you find instead? The prosecutor asked. I found a man who treated his wife like property, who was ashamed of her heritage, who made her hide the language she spoke, the food she cooked, the prayers she prayed. Rosa's eyes never left Marcus. I watched Maria try to love him anyway, try to teach their son to be better than his father. Objection. Marcus's lawyer cut in. This is irrelevant to the charges. Overruled. Blackwood's voice was sharp. Continue. Maria died believing she had failed. Rosa's voice cracked slightly, then steadied. She died thinking Jesse would become just another version of his father, cold, cruel, caring only for power and land. She looked at Jesse sitting beside Grace in the gallery. Something warm passed between them. She was wrong. Jesse became the man she hoped for, a man who would sacrifice everything for what's right. Rosa turned back to Marcus. And you became exactly what she feared. A monster who destroys families, who murders innocent men, who would tear children from the only mother they've ever known, just to add more acres to your empire. That's enough, Marcus's lawyer snapped. Your Honor, this witness is clearly biased. She's telling the truth. The voice came from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Blonde. Beautiful. Dressed in clothes that screamed wealth and breeding. Grace recognized her from Jesse's descriptions. Catherine Prescott, the railroad baron's daughter. The woman Marcus had wanted Jesse to marry. Miss Prescott. Judge Blackwood frowned. This is highly irregular. I know, Your Honor. Catherine walked forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. But I have testimony that's relevant to this case. Testimony I should have given years ago. She took the witness stand without being asked. Sat with the poise of someone born to privilege and just now learning what to do with it. 5 years ago, Catherine said, Marcus Callahan approached my father about a business arrangement. Land rights in exchange for railroad access. My father agreed at first. What changed his mind? He discovered that Mr. Callahan's methods of acquiring land were unorthodox. Catherine's voice hardened. My father may be many things, but he's not a murderer. When he realized what Marcus was doing, the intimidation, the violence, the families being driven from their homes, he ended the partnership. And what happened then? Mr. Callahan threatened him. Said he had evidence of my father's involvement in some of the early transactions. Said he'd destroy our family's reputation if we didn't cooperate. Catherine's eyes found Marcus. He's been blackmailing us ever since. Forcing my father to look the other way. Using me as leverage to try to control Jesse. The courtroom erupted. Marcus was on his feet shouting objections. His lawyer was demanding a recess. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel until order was restored. One more outburst and I'll clear this courtroom, Blackwood warned. He turned to Catherine. Miss Prescott, do you have documentation to support these claims? I do, Your Honor. Catherine pulled a packet of letters from her bag. Correspondence between Mr. Callahan and my father. Threats, demands, evidence of payments made under duress. The documents were entered into evidence. The trial continued. But Grace could see the shift in the room. The jury was no longer uncertain. The crowd was no longer divided. Marcus Callahan's empire was crumbling one truth at a time. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, intimidation, arson. Grace watched the bailiffs lead Marcus away in chains. Watch the man who'd terrorized this territory for decades, reduced to just another prisoner. He didn't look at his son as he passed. Didn't acknowledge Grace or the children or any of the people whose lives he'd destroyed. He simply walked head high as if he were still the king of everything he surveyed. "Mrs. Callahan." Judge Blackwood's voice pulled her attention back. "A word, please." Grace approached the bench, her heart hammering. Beside her, Jesse's hand found the small of her back steadying. "The court has reviewed the custody petition filed by the defendant before these proceedings began." Blackwood's voice was formal, but his eyes were kind. "In light of the evidence presented, including testimony to your character, your care for these children, and the circumstances of your marriage, I am formally dismissing all challenges to your custody." Grace's breath caught. "Your Honor. Furthermore," Blackwood continued, "I am ordering that the property known as the Whitmore Homestead be confirmed in your name absolutely. The defendant's claim to the land is hereby void, along with all associated liens and encumbrances." Tears streamed down Grace's face. She couldn't stop them. Didn't try. "The children," she managed, "my children, are legally yours, Mrs. Callahan. By virtue of your marriage and the adoption papers that I understand Mr. Harrison has already prepared." Blackwood allowed himself a small smile. This court finds no reason to separate a family that has fought so hard to stay together. It was over. After everything. The blizzard, the threats, the courtroom battles, the fear that had become so constant, she'd forgotten what its absence felt like. It was finally over. Grace turned to find her family waiting. Jesse, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Will trying so hard to look stoic and failing completely. Sarah already crying, reaching for her. Tommy confused, but happy, because everyone else seemed happy. She gathered them all in her arms. Held on, like she'd never let go. "We won," Sarah whispered. "Ma, we won." "We did." Grace pressed kisses to each of their foreheads. "We won." And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train in Texas, Grace Whitmore Callahan believed that everything was going to be all right. Spring came slowly to Texas that year. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth that would soon turn green. The creek behind the farmhouse ran high and fast with snowmelt. The sound of rushing water, a constant reminder that life continued. Seasons changed, and even the harshest winters eventually gave way to warmth. Grace stood on the porch of what was now legally and completely her home. 3 months had passed since the trial. 3 months since Marcus Callahan had been led away in chains. 3 months of learning what peace felt like after so long at war. "You're thinking too loud." She turned to find Jesse behind her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, that half smile on his face that still made her heart skip, despite everything they'd been through together. "I'm thinking about how different everything looks now," Grace said, accepting the cup he offered. "Same land, same house, same view. But it doesn't feel the same." "That's because you're not the same." Jesse moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The woman who stepped off that train 6 months ago wouldn't recognize you now." "Is that good or bad?" "Good." Jesse's voice softened. "Definitely good." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the morning light spread across their property. Their property. The words still felt strange in Grace's mind, still carried the weight of everything they'd sacrificed to make them true. "Jesse." Grace turned to face him. "I need to ask you something." "Anything." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She gestured at the modest farmhouse. The small barn, the land that was valuable for its water, but humble in every other way. "You gave up an empire for this. For us." Jesse was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved across the property, taking in everything they'd built and everything they'd lost to build it. "You know what I remember most about growing up in that mansion?" he said finally. "The silence. Halls so big you could go days without seeing another person. Meals where nobody spoke because nobody had anything to say to each other. All that space, all that wealth, and it felt like living in a tomb. He turned to look at her, and Grace saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. This place, this little farmhouse with its creaky floors and drafty windows, and 3 children who never stop making noise. This is the first place that's ever felt like home. Jessie's hand found hers, interlaced their fingers. I don't regret a single thing. Not one. Even giving up your inheritance. Especially that. Jessie smiled, but there was something serious beneath it. My father spent his whole life building an empire on other people's suffering. I'd rather have nothing than inherit that. Grace squeezed his hand. You don't have nothing. You have us. I know. Jessie pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her forehead. That's why I'm the richest man in Texas. The kitchen door banged open. Tommy came flying out, his small body a blur of motion and excitement. Ma, Pa Will says there's a man coming up the road. Grace's heart clenched instinctively. Old fears died hard. Even now, even after everything, a stranger approaching still sent ice through her veins. What kind of man? Jessie asked, his voice carefully calm. A fancy man. With a fancy carriage. Tommy was practically vibrating with curiosity. Will says he looks important. Jessie and Grace exchanged glances. Without a word, they moved together toward the front of the house, where Will stood on the porch with the rifle Grace had made him promise to keep handy. The carriage was indeed fancy black lacquered wood, with brass fittings pulled by 2 matching grays, not the kind of vehicle that typically found its way to a homesteader's farm. I don't recognize it, Jessie said quietly. Neither do I. The carriage stopped. A footman jumped down, opened the door with practiced efficiency, and from within emerged the last person Grace had expected to see. Catherine Prescott. She looked different than she had at the trial. Less polished. More real. Her hair was simply arranged, her dress practical, rather than fashionable. She walked toward them, with none of the aristocratic glide. Grace remembered her steps uncertain, in a way that spoke of genuine nervousness. Mrs. Callahan. Mr. Callahan. Catherine stopped at the foot of the porch steps. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I wasn't sure if you'd see me if I rode ahead. Miss Prescott. Grace kept her voice neutral. This is unexpected. I know. And I know I have no right to ask anything of you, not after... Catherine stopped. Started again. May I speak with you? Both of you, I have information you need to hear. Grace looked at Jessie. His jaw was tight, but he nodded slightly. Come inside, Grace said. The children can give us privacy. They settled in the small parlor, Catherine perched on the edge of a chair, like she might bolt at any moment. Grace noticed her hands trembling slightly as she removed her gloves. I've been visiting Marcus Callahan in prison, Catherine said without preamble. Jessie went rigid. Why? Because my father asked me to. Because I felt that someone should make sure he understood what he'd done, the full scope of it. Catherine's voice steadied as she spoke. I've been bringing him news, telling him about the families he destroyed, the lives he ruined, making him face it. And? Grace asked. Has it made a difference? I don't know. He doesn't say much, just listens. Catherine paused. But yesterday, he gave me something. Asked me to bring it to you. She reached into her bag, withdrew a thick envelope. Held it out toward Jessie with hands that were no longer trembling. What is it? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. Just said... Catherine's voice caught. He said it was for his son. The only thing he had left worth giving. Jessie stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Grace watched emotions war across his face. Anger, grief, the complicated love that never quite died, no matter how much a parent betrayed it. Take it, Grace said softly. Whatever it is you need to know. Jessie reached out. His fingers closed around the envelope. For a long moment he just held it, feeling the weight of whatever confession or cruelty it contained. Then he opened it. Papers spilled out onto his lap. Documents, Grace realized. Legal documents with official seals and signatures. Jesse read through them, his face going pale, then flushed, then pale again. "Jesse." Grace moved to his side. "What is it?" "The ranch." Jesse's voice came out strangled. "He's signed over the Callahan Ranch. All of it. The land, the cattle, the water rights, everything." "What?" "There's a letter." Jesse's hands shook as he unfolded the final paper. He read aloud, his voice breaking on every other word. "Jesse, I have done terrible things. Things I cannot undo, cannot justify, cannot ask forgiveness for. Your mother tried to tell me. You tried to tell me. I didn't listen. I was so certain that power and land and legacy were all that mattered. I was wrong. I am dying. The doctor says weeks, maybe less. There is no treatment, and I would not accept it if there were. I have earned this end, but before I go, I want to do one thing right. The ranch belongs to you. It always should have. Do with it what your mother would have wanted. What you wanted before I twisted your dreams into my own. Tell Grace Whitmore, tell your wife that I am sorry. Not for losing, for everything that came before, for Jacob, for the fear I caused her children, for being the kind of man who could do such things and call it business. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want her to know that in the end, I understood. She won because she deserved to win, because she fought for something real while I fought for nothing but my own empty hunger. Take care of your family, son. They are the only legacy that matters. Your father." Silence filled the room. Grace stared at the letter in Jesse's hands, at the tears streaming unchecked down his face, at Catherine Prescott sitting frozen in her chair with an expression of profound shock. "He's dying," Jesse's voice cracked. "He's dying, and he never said, he didn't want you to know." Catherine's voice was soft. "He said he didn't deserve your grief, didn't want to manipulate you into caring about him at the end." "That's not—" Jesse stood abruptly, the papers scattering at his feet. "That's not his choice to make. He doesn't get to decide whether I grieve him. He doesn't get to—" He broke off, pressed his hands against his face. His shoulders shook with sobs he was trying desperately to control. Grace went to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind, held on while the man who'd saved her family fell apart in her arms. "I hated him," Jesse choked out. "I hated him so much, but he was still my father. He was still—" "I know." Grace pressed her face against his back. "I know." They stood there for a long time. Catherine slipped out quietly, leaving them alone with grief and complicated forgiveness and the strange, painful gift of a dying man's repentance. Jesse went to see his father 2 days later. Grace offered to come with him. He said no. Said this was something he needed to do alone. Said there were things that needed to be spoken between father and son that no one else should hear. He was gone for 6 hours. When he came back, his eyes were red and swollen, his voice hoarse, but something in his face had changed. Some weight had lifted. Some wound had begun finally to heal. "He's gone," Jesse said. "Died about an hour after I arrived, but he was conscious. We talked." "What did you say?" Jesse was quiet for a moment. His eyes found hers, and Grace saw peace there alongside the grief. "I told him I forgave him. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if I can forgive what he did to Jacob, to all those families. But I said the words. I gave him that at the end." Jesse's voice broke. "He said thank you. And then he said he was proud of me. That he'd never said it before, but he was proud of the man I'd become." Grace pulled him into her arms, held him while he cried for the father he'd lost years ago and buried today. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "Whatever else he was, whatever he did, he was still your father. He needed to hear those words. I needed to say them." Jesse pulled back, wiped his face. "For myself. So I could move forward without carrying that hate forever." And can you move forward? Jesse looked at her, at the small house around them, at the sounds of children playing in the yard, his children now, legally and completely. Yeah, he said. I think I can. The funeral was simple. Marcus Callahan had wanted no service, no mourning, no pretense of grief from people who'd spent years fearing him. But Jesse insisted on something small. A burial in the family plot next to Maria. A few words spoken over the grave. Grace stood beside her husband, holding his hand, watching him say goodbye to the man who'd nearly destroyed them both. My father built an empire, Jesse said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. Rosa, a few ranch hands who'd known Marcus in better days, Catherine Prescott, who'd somehow become something like a friend. But he died alone. That's the price of building on fear instead of love. That's what happens when you forget that people matter more than property. He paused, looked down at the simple wooden coffin. I'm not going to pretend he was a good man. He wasn't. He did terrible things, hurt innocent people, destroyed families. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to undo some of the damage he caused. Jesse's voice steadied. But at the end he saw the truth. At the end he tried to make it right, not because he could fix what he'd broken, but because he finally understood that it needed fixing. That has to count for something. He dropped a handful of dirt onto the coffin. Rest now, Father. Whatever you did, whatever you were, it's over. The empire you built will become something different, something better, something Mama would have been proud of. They walked away from the grave together, leaving Marcus Callahan to his final rest. What are you going to do with the ranch? Grace asked as they rode home. I've been thinking about that. Jesse's voice was thoughtful. All that land, all those resources, it could do a lot of good. Help homesteaders who are struggling. Provide jobs for families who need them. Build something that actually benefits the territory instead of exploiting it. That sounds like a lot of work. It will be. Jesse turned to look at her. But I've got help. If she's willing. Grace felt a smile tugging at her lips. Are you asking me to help you run a cattle empire? I'm asking you to help me turn a cattle empire into something that matters. Jesse's hand found hers. We've already proven we make a good team. Might as well keep going. What about the farm? We keep it. It's home. Jesse's voice softened. We can run the ranch operations from town, hire good people to manage the day-to-day. But this... He gestured at the modest farmhouse coming into view. This is where we belong. This is where our family started. I don't want to lose that. Grace thought about everything they'd been through to keep this piece of land. The blizzard, the threats, the courtroom battles, the terror of almost losing her children. And she thought about what it had become. Not just a farm, but a symbol. Proof that ordinary people could stand against powerful ones and win. Proof that love was stronger than fear. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Let's build something worth having. The wedding celebration happened in July. Not a second wedding, they were already married, had been for months. But Jesse insisted they deserved a proper celebration now that the fighting was over. A chance to gather everyone who'd helped them survive and thank them properly. The farmhouse couldn't hold everyone, so they set up tables in the yard. Rosa cooked for 3 days straight, producing more food than Grace had seen in one place in her entire life. Will helped Jesse string lanterns between the trees. Sarah picked wildflowers until her arms ached. Even Tommy contributed, carefully arranging napkins at each place setting, with the solemn concentration of a 5-year-old, convinced he'd been given the most important job in the world. You look beautiful, Ma. Grace turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway of the bedroom. She'd put on her best dress new, bought with money from the Callahan estate, and tried to arrange her auburn hair in something approaching elegance. You think so? I know so. Sarah crossed the room, took Grace's hands. I also know that Mama, my first Mama, would be happy. About all of this. About you. Grace's throat tightened. How do you know that? Because she wanted us to be loved. She told me once before she got sick that the most important thing was finding people who'd love us no matter what. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. You love us like that. Like we're yours. Like nothing could ever make you stop. Nothing could. Grace pulled Sarah into her arms. Nothing ever will. I know. Sarah hugged her tight, then pulled back with a watery smile. Now come on. Everyone's waiting, and Will says if we don't start soon, Tommy's going to eat all the cake before dinner. The celebration was everything Grace hadn't known she wanted. Neighbors who'd once whispered about her now raised glasses in her honor. Homesteaders she'd never met thanked her for giving them hope. Harrison made a speech about justice that made everyone cry. Rosa told stories about Jesse as a boy that made everyone laugh. And through it all, Grace held Jesse's hand and watched her family, her real true chosen family, celebrating the life they'd fought so hard to build. Dance with me. Jesse pulled her to her feet as someone started playing a fiddle. I want to hold my wife in front of everyone and show them how lucky I am. You're ridiculous. I'm in love. Jesse spun her onto the makeshift dance floor. There's a difference, allegedly. They danced under stars that seemed brighter than Grace remembered stars being back in Boston. Around them, other couples joined in. Will awkwardly guiding Sarah through steps. She was too impatient to follow Tommy spinning in circles by himself until he got dizzy and fell down laughing. I have something for you. Jesse's voice was soft against her ear. Something I've been waiting to give you until tonight. Jesse, you've given me everything. Not this. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. This was my mother's. She made my father promise to give it to the woman I married, but he never did. I found it in the safe the night I took the documents. Grace opened the box. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, was a ring. Simple gold band with a small emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds, beautiful in its modesty. Maria would have wanted you to have this. Jesse's voice cracked slightly. She would have loved you, Grace. She would have loved what you've done. How you've fought for these children. How you've stood up against everything. How you've turned tragedy into triumph. Jesse. Let me finish. He took the ring from the box, slid it onto her finger beside the simple wedding band she'd worn since March. This ring is a promise. Not from me. I've already made my promises. This is a promise from her, from my mother, from your husband's memory, from everyone who came before us and wanted better for the ones who'd come after. Grace looked at the ring on her finger, looked at the man who'd given it to her, looked at the celebration swirling around them, at the children laughing at the future, stretching bright and uncertain and beautiful before them. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep fighting. Jesse's eyes held hers. Say you'll keep being the woman who walked through a blizzard to save 3 children who weren't even hers yet. Say you'll keep believing that love is stronger than fear, that family is more than blood, that second chances are worth taking. I'll say something better. Grace rose on her toes, pressed her lips to his. I'll say yes. To everything. To whatever comes next. Yes. Jesse's smile was brighter than the lanterns above them. That's all I needed to hear. The party lasted until well past midnight. By the time the last guests left, Grace was exhausted in the best possible way. She stood on the porch of her farmhouse, watching the lantern light fade, listening to the sounds of her children settling into sleep. Jesse appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Same gesture he'd made that morning. Same quiet companionship that had become the foundation of everything. Long day, he said. Best day. Grace accepted the coffee, leaned into his warmth. I keep waiting to wake up, waiting for someone to tell me this is all a dream, and I'm still on that train from Boston heading toward a life I couldn't imagine. It's not a dream. I know. That's what makes it miraculous. They stood in silence, watching the stars. Somewhere in the house, Tommy cried out softly in his sleep, and then settled. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a family at peace. Grace. Jesse's voice was serious. I need to tell you something. What? When I found you in that blizzard, when I said all 4 of you get in, I didn't know what I was starting. I just saw people who needed help. I didn't know it would become this. This. Everything. Jesse gestured at the farm, the house, the life they'd built. I didn't know I'd fall in love. Didn't know I'd find a family. Didn't know that saving strangers from a snowstorm would end up saving me. Grace turned to face him fully. You saved me first. Maybe. Jesse's hand cupped her cheek. Or maybe we saved each other. Maybe that's how it works when people stop being strangers and start being family. I like that. Grace smiled. I like that version of the story. It's the true version. Then it's the only one that matters. Jesse kissed her. Soft and slow and full of promise. The kiss of a man who'd found something he'd stopped believing existed. The kiss of a woman who'd built a life from nothing but courage and stubborn hope. When they finally pulled apart, the first light of dawn was touching the horizon. New day, Jesse said. New beginning. Same family. Grace looked at her husband, at the home behind them, at the future stretching ahead. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, scared, desperate, clinging to 3 children who weren't hers yet. She thought about everything she'd survived, the blizzard, the threats, the trial. The moment when all seemed lost and she'd refused to stop fighting anyway. And she thought about what she'd gained. Not land, though she had that. Not money, though that too was no longer a worry. Not even safety, though her children would never know the terror of uncertainty again. What she'd gained was simpler than all of that and infinitely more precious. She'd gained a family. A real family built not from blood, but from choice. From love. From the stubborn insistence that some things were worth any sacrifice, any battle, any price. Come inside, she said, taking Jesse's hand. The children will be up soon. Tommy's been asking for pancakes. Jesse smiled. Then pancakes it is. They walked into their home together as the sun rose over Texas, leaving behind the long night and everything they'd survived to reach this morning. Grace Whitmore Callahan had come to this territory as a stranger, a mail-order bride with nothing but hope and fear in equal measure. She was leaving that identity behind. From this day forward, she was simply Grace, mother of 3, wife of 1, builder of a home that would stand for generations, and that was enough. That was everything. That was the only legacy that had ever truly mattered.